Hello, Philos Catholic family. Simone here. I'm with my co-host James, and we have a very special guest this week. We are with Zac Crippen, and I've known Zac for a long time now, decades, in fact. And this is a man who not only breathes with 2 lungs, but maybe 3 lungs, because he is a convert from the Protestant tradition to Roman Catholicism to now the Ruthenian Church, which is under the Byzantine Rite. So we are so excited to hear your story, Zac. We're going to let you introduce yourself, and James is going to lead this interview. But I just want to say that when you became a Catholic, I was obviously so very, very happy. But I also remember that you put together like an apologia, and I read it with so much enthusiasm and eagerness. So, Zac, if you could tell our audience a little bit about who you are, and then James, I'm grateful to you for interviewing Zac, because I know Zac for a long time, and I'd like to hear this interview through someone else's eyes.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me, both of you. It's a delight to be with you. I'm really appreciative of what you're doing at the Philos Project, and it's super needed right now. It seems like every day we hear about something going on in the Holy Land, and it's very difficult, especially now. There's a lot of, this is what you guys see every day and what you work among. So you see all of the vitriol directed towards our Jewish brothers and sisters in the Holy Land, a lot of misunderstandings about the historical claims to property there. There's a lot of suffering going on. That's undeniable on both sides. And I'm really grateful for what you are all doing to just advance awareness of what's going on and help Christians be able to understand their Hebraic roots and all of that. So thanks for what you're doing. And I'm really excited about this Beyond Rome thing too. I have a particular interest in church unity. In fact, as Simone mentioned, I am a convert from the Protestant tradition, which, by the way, for those who are listening who are in the Protestant tradition or perhaps are converts themselves, I think it bears mentioning that I bear no ill will to that tradition whatsoever. It really formed me. And I think about this quite a bit when I think about how I was raised to be a believing Christian by my parents. I went to college and sort of had a period where I, of course, had to figure out for myself what I believed. And so I went through this period of questioning where I've sometimes described myself as sort of a soft agnostic in college, but I think that's a pretty normal process for a young college student sort of encountering the world of ideas.
Right.
But Father Richard John Newhouse, after he converted to Catholicism from Lutheranism, wrote a great open letter to his Lutheran colleagues and friends in the pages of First Things. And I encourage you to go look at this, because what he describes there is what I connect with and feel very deeply, which is that I don't blame the Protestant tradition for anything that it gave me, because it gave me a love for Christ. And it's that love for Christ that ultimately led me to his church here where I am today. And so we bear this very special kinship as Catholics with our separated brothers and sisters who are in the Protestant world. And I'm really grateful for the passion that they have for Jesus every day. And I really admire many of them who love Jesus even more than I do and are happier and holier than I am. So that's a wonderful gift to us Catholics to be able to sort of feed off of their love and enthusiasm for Jesus.
Can I
wouldn't
say
really
something really quick?
Yeah,
Zac,
please.
Really,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. I want to say that I share obviously your passion for church unity for many reasons, but also that I grew up going to evangelical Vacation Bible School, which is far superior than Catholic Vacation Bible School. They're just better at the Bible. And the Catholics who read the scriptures in America read the scriptures. It became popular because of Protestants.
That's right.
And your dad is one of those people that led to my own reversion to the Catholic Church. So I just love the sentiment that you threw out there towards our brothers and sisters in Christ, regardless of Catholic or not, because I was given a love for Jesus in the Bible through an evangelical experience. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. And you're right that Protestants have done so much to promote biblical literacy, and Catholics are behind the curve on coming out with all their study Bibles. Ascension now has this great Adventure Study Bible, which is great. Ignatius, with Scott Hahn and several other editors, have been compiling this Ignatius Study Bible that I think just this fall is finally being published in its entirety. It's been coming out sort of piecemeal for the last several years. But Protestants have been in this space for a long time. They've been in the ring creating all kinds of study Bibles. There are probably 3 like solid in terms of scholarship and the sort of heft behind them study Bibles that are out there on the market already. I actually still read my favorite study Bible that I've ever encountered to this day is the ESV study Bible published by Crossway. I read out of that every morning. This morning, it's just, you have to read it with just sort of a discerning eye, and you take their notes with a grain of salt, but the notes are very helpful. And so this morning, for example, I was looking at the lectionary for today in the Latin Rite, and the gospel reading is Matthew 16. And this is the passage where Jesus says, in response to Peter confessing, "You are the Christ," he says, "You are Peter, and on this rock I build my church." And the note there in the ESV study Bible is very interesting because they outline the sort of plausible arguments for what Jesus means by this, right? Is he saying the confession is the rock? Is he saying Peter is the rock, etc.? And they actually acknowledge that the strongest argument is that he's saying Peter is the rock, which is like, oh, that's interesting as a Catholic reading this in my Protestant study Bible. However, then they go on and say, well, but that doesn't mean that he has any sort of special claim to authority, or he doesn't, sit in a special chair. But all that to say, I still to this day, every morning when I read that Bible, I experience the riches of the Protestant tradition in that way, and I have great respect for it. As Simone mentioned, I am officially now a Byzantine Catholic in the Ruthenian Church. And that's just like very late breaking. As of a few weeks ago, our transfer was officially approved. I would not describe this as a conversion. I would describe this as sort of, learning how to breathe with another lung, in the words of John Paul II.
Yes, wrong word. My apologies. Wrong.
No, I think, but I think it's, it's certainly semantics, but I also think it just matters in the way that we think about this, because there was no intellectual conversion on my part. It wasn't that I came to this understanding like, oh my goodness, the Byzantine Church is true. No, the Catholic Church is true, and we're all part of this one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. And so there was no intellectual conversion necessary. I can talk about sort of the reasons that my wife and I decided to become officially Ruthenian in the Byzantine Rite, and we're very grateful for it. And it's been such a blessing in our lives. But we are Catholic through and through, and we'll never abandon the Catholic Church. I mean, we're here to stay, and just really delighted with what we have found in the Byzantine tradition.
Yeah, well, why don't you hop into some of those points? Because I'd love to hear, as a Roman Latin Rite Catholic, what drew you and your wife to the Ruthenian Byzantine Church? Yeah,
for sure. I will also say at the outset, I am a baby Byzantine. And so, there are, I'm sure many people, you guys just had Father Hezekiah Carnazzo on the podcast, I think, right?
Yeah.
And so he's an expert, in a true way. And I really admire Father Hezekiah, and I've benefited from his teaching. And so I do not at all profess to be an expert on anything Byzantine. Like I said, I'm very much a baby Byzantine. All I can share is my personal journey and the things that I've experienced and learned along the way. And I'm certainly happy to share those, but nothing that I say is to be held as definitive in any respect. And I welcome fraternal correction from any of your listeners who want to do so.
Well, so I'm kind of curious too. Sorry to interrupt again, but I'm James and I are still figuring out how to co-host, mainly because I talk a lot. But why not Orthodoxy? Why Catholicism from the outset? If you want to address that at some point, I'd love to know that as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can address that right now because I think that's a very important question. Well, like I said, I have always been very motivated by church unity. And in fact, Simone, I don't even know if we've talked about this exactly, but the sort of where I trace the beginnings of my journey to the Catholic Church are, I guess they are many, and there's not a single beginning. But the point at which the seed was most cogently formulated in my soul, I think, was when I read a book called Surprised by Hope that's by an Anglican bishop named N.T. Wright. And so you might think this is kind of weird. Why is an Anglican bishop spurring Zac's conversion? Which is a very fair question. But this book is about eschatology, and it's a well-informed and well-researched sort of inquiry into what happens at the consummation of the age. What is God's plan for the end of the world? And I was reading that book really fascinated by it. And I remember N.T. Wright sort of taking to task this very, I guess I might say sort of ill-formed idea of us all just going to heaven and sort of bouncing around in clouds playing harps like naked cherubs or something. Because that's obviously a ridiculous idea of heaven that's just born out of like a Precious Moments catalog, not actually the Christian tradition.
Ew, precious moments.
And so he's like, rightly so, he's taking these ideas to task. And by the way, this is not me even just criticizing these ideas in Protestant theology, because those ideas are also in Catholic theology. And, you can see like portrayals of the afterlife in sort of modern Catholic art in similar, like very sort of cheap ways. So anyway, N.T. Wright is talking about all this, and there's a portion of his book, and I guess it's sort of a through line of this book, in which he talks about the church and the church's role in the end of the age, and how God is effecting his purposes throughout all time through this mechanism, the church. And he has different views on ecclesiology than I do, especially now, but that got me thinking, well, what is the church? And if God has this grand plan, this giant melodrama in which we are all participating, what is the church's role in that? And if we have an idea of what the church's role is, we should probably have an idea of what the church is as well. And so this interest in church unity or Christian unity really got me thinking, I should figure out what the church is and what the church professes to be. Now, even long before I was a Byzantine Catholic, I viewed the Orthodox, as I think every Catholic should, as like very, very close siblings, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And this is evident in the language of John Paul II. I mean, when John Paul II talked about both lungs, he wasn't talking about the Latin Rite Catholics and the Eastern Rite Catholics. Mm-hmm. He was talking about the great Western and Eastern traditions of the church,
right.
The latter of which encompasses, our Eastern Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox. Mm-hmm. And so the language of the Catholicism, especially in the 20th century, and you can certainly find examples prior to that where it has not been ecumenical towards the Orthodox like that, but it has been very ecumenical. And I think every Catholic is really obligated to see Orthodox as Christians who are so close to us. They obviously have a different spirituality, and it's a robust, it's a valuable, it's an important spirituality. It's one that the Byzantines share, which is exciting. And they obviously have different views on the papacy, but the apostolic succession is there. The validity of the sacraments is there. The richness of the tradition is there. And so that's a really important thing. As far as Simone's question about why not Orthodoxy, I think that to be Orthodox is also to reject the Western tradition. And I think that we need to be encompassing both the Western and the Eastern traditions, to say nothing of the papacy, of which I'm obviously convinced of the truth as well. And for those who are interested in this, I would recommend this Catholic scholar who's not very well known, but he should be much better known. He's a convert from Anglicanism, actually, like myself. His name is Eric, spelled E-R-I-C-K, Ibarra, Y-B-A-R-R-A. And to my knowledge, he's the best sort of amateur theologian out there on the papacy. And I don't say amateur to say that he doesn't have any special knowledge, because he does. He probably has more knowledge of the papacy than anyone who's studied this, at our PhD institutions, because he reads all about the papacy and he writes books about the papacy. And so he's really good. And he has his own YouTube channel. So I'm convinced of the truth of the papacy. I'm convinced of the truth of the Catholic Church, and I do not want to reject the great tradition of the West. I want to accept the great tradition of the East.
What a fine answer.
Yeah, it is. I think there's a tendency for Catholics who are very Western, someone like myself too. I know when I was younger, I'm still young, but when you don't have any sort of engagement with the Eastern churches, even on an intellectual or rational level, I know I tended to kind of clump them all together, like Orthodox, Eastern churches. So this awareness that the Orthodox weren't in union with the church was kind of tied up with Eastern churches generally, like even if they were actually Catholic churches in union with the Pope, with the Roman Church. I think there was this kind of mental packaging together where, they must have been Orthodox. They're probably like the Orthodox. And I think even now with my work, Simone, with our work here, I tell people I've been to a Byzantine liturgy, or even like married priest is something that's very uncomfortable to them. But it's this is this great, rich tradition, this tapestry within the universal Catholic Church. And it's something that has been very extensively approached by the church in the last 50, 60 years. But it feels like on the ground, few people have any sort of actual engagement with it, even if they're coming to slowly, rationally understand. What was your experience once you had become Roman Catholic? What kind of got you leaning more into the Byzantine, the Eastern churches? Was there a particular experience? Did you go to Mass? Did you have a friend who was Byzantine?
Good question. No, I have several Byzantine friends for sure. I hadn't had extensive conversations with them about the Byzantine tradition. And of course, Simone's an Eastern Catholic. But I think, again, Simone, I don't think we'd had an extensive conversation about it. I think we had mostly just talked about sort of Latin Rite Catholicism, which obviously is in much greater supply than Armenian Catholicism in the United States.
I know. I need to grab more Byzantines to the Armenian right before you get to the Byzantine Rite, because there's so
yeah. Well, I still have not. It's hard to get to one, but I still have not been to an Armenian liturgy, and I'd love to. So, where there are 4 churches in the U.S., right? Where are they?
There are 7 in North America of Armenian Catholic. There are a lot of Armenian Apostolic, Armenian Orthodox, but Armenian Catholics, there's 7 in. There's 1 in Canada and 6 in the U.S. And 2 are in California.
Gotcha. Yeah. I'll have to get the list of the cities from you so that when I'm traveling through one, I can stop in for a liturgy.
Oh, that'd be amazing.
Yeah. So my experience, James, good question. I mean, prior to attending a divine liturgy, I had some encounter with the tradition of iconography and just thought that was so cool. And it's so foreign in that it's not. There are obviously some echoes of it in the way the Westerns adorn their churches with sacred art, et cetera, and have various, pious statues in their churches. But the theology of those two things is very different. And so I was fascinated by iconography. And then there were little things too. I think we had been gifted an icon or two in our home. We would do family prayers every night. And there's this book that I think is no longer published by the USCCB, but it's just called Catholic Household Blessings and Prayers. And we found this great, sort of evening prayer thing for our family to do. And then we would just go through it every night and do these prayers. And then one day we noticed at the very bottom, it said this was actually a Byzantine prayer service. And we're like, well, that's kind of cool. And so we ended up moving in 2021 to a place that had a Byzantine church. It was Ruthenian. And we thought, well, I mean, this is kind of our chance. We've never been to divine liturgy. Let's go check it out. And so we go there and we attend this divine liturgy on a Sunday morning. And it just sort of blows our minds. I mean, it's just, this particular church, if listeners are in the Chicago area, I encourage you to check this out. It's in Homer Glen, Illinois, southwest of the city. And it's called Annunciation of our Lord, Byzantine Catholic Church, I think. Or Annunciation of Mary, the Mother of God, I think is what it's called. Byzantine Catholic Church. I should know this in more detail.
Marian.
This is my home church.
Sense,
we just call it Annunciation, but if you search Annunciation Byzantine Catholic Church, you'll find it in Homer Glen. But the priest there, Father Thomas Loya, is also an iconographer, so he personally has adorned every square inch of the walls and ceiling of the church with icons. So just going in, it's a very incredible experience. It feels like you've entered into something that is totally different. And then we experience the divine liturgy, and it's just very unlike Mass. Obviously, the sacraments are real, so it is like Mass, and that ontologically it is like Mass, but experientially, aesthetically, it's very different from a Latin Rite Mass. And so that was just really, really cool. We all got back in the car after we said hi and met some people there, and I remember turning around and talking to my kids in the back and my wife in the passenger seat and saying, so what do we all think? And everyone loved it. So we thought, okay, I think we might have just found our church. And Simone, I don't know if you remember, I think I texted you like that day or the next day. And so like, we just went to our first divine liturgy.
I was so happy.
Yeah.
It was definitely, if it was Ruthenian that I went to, but I would imagine it's kind of generally the same across the Byzantine Rite where you stand during the consecration. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
That was something as a Roman Catholic, it just felt so strange to do. So I'm sure you had that experience too within like the first divine liturgy you went to, where there's so many similarities, but it almost makes the differences more jarring. And that it's not a bad thing, but it's definitely this like, wow, you just break out of this like making the small T traditions such a big deal. And I think that's something, I mean, I have an experience of that being in a very tight-knit Roman Catholic community where we can definitely make a bigger deal out of these things. And they're beautiful because they are our tradition. But within, Catholicism, big T tradition, the dogmas, all of that, it's beautiful to actually have an experience of the small T traditions. And again, the whole tapestry of the faith within it. Something I always find interesting is having engaged with Protestants. I'm a Creedal Catholic, and it wasn't until after college, during college, that I started to have more engagement with Protestants. How would you argue with like diversity and unity among Protestants? How does that change with this diversity and unity within the church? Because I've always thought the Eastern rites, the Eastern churches, having those kind of incorporated more into the Catholic I guess, mindset, the Catholic life, brings out this diversity that most people don't realize the church has. So I've always found, like, as a Protestant, you have these diverse churches, but there's this lack of unity that exists. Was that something that drew you to Catholicism, that unity, and then discovering that diversity, or was it just generally following the truth, new house? Was there anything there for that?
Yeah, I maybe have a few comments here, and you can tell me if it answers your question. I think that when I started thinking about church unity, I thought, okay, if I'm going to find the church or understand what the church is, one mark of the church will be that the church is actually united.
Mm-hmm.
Now that sounds like maybe a little bit tautological, perhaps a bit reductionistic, but I think that actually is true. Like the church that is the true church should be actually one church, and that's quite evidently not the case with many of your options out there. It seems like every year now there's some news of some like mainline Protestant denomination that's fracturing again. I think the Methodists just did.
Yeah.
Growing up as an Anglican, my formative years in high school were literally living through a parish split, and the parish split was over a couple things. There was some sort of leadership issues on the pastor's side, but then there was also the broader issue in the Episcopal Church over ordaining a bishop who was leading an openly homosexual lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just watched the entire Episcopal Church in the United States fracture and split, and that split was just a symptom of what was happening in the broader Anglican communion. So the Anglican communion to this day is going through a quite significant rupture. And so this happens time and time again. And there's not really a Protestant denomination that is marked by this global unity that is both global and enduring. So I really think the only possible claimants to that title would be the Orthodox and the Catholic churches.
Yeah.
As far as your point about sort of diversity in the Catholic Church, I mean, I think diversity is a good thing. And we see this, in Paul's writings, for example, where he's talking about, everyone having their own gifts, or we see this in Jesus quite clearly opening up the kingdom of God to the Gentiles. There's clearly a diversity in the kingdom of God.
Right.
I think the Anglican saying has been sort of diversity or unity in essentials and diversity in non-essentials, which I think everyone can get behind. The problem is if there's no teaching authority to actually tell you what the essentials are, no one's going to agree on what the essentials are that you need to be united on.
Yeah.
And so the fact that the Catholic Church does have this hermeneutic of authority that it can rely on to tell us what are the things we need to be united on is a big difference maker.
Yeah. Even within the rites, this is something I was talking about with Simone after our episode with Nicole Delaney on the Eastern churches from a more legal or
because she's a canon lawyer.
She's a canon lawyer, yeah. So she's
listened to that episode,
yeah. But something I mentioned to Simone was even getting into our Hebraic roots was even churches physically, the way they're built is based on the Jewish temple. It's built off that, but the Jewish temple is ordered towards creation. Like when God is telling the Israelites how to build a temple, it's all very evocative of creation, the garden. But Thomas Aquinas has he speaks about creation and the diversity within it as well. How true diversity can only exist within true unity as well. And God, of course, being that unity. But within the church, I love how you have this, it's through this true unity that you get this diversity on, like, you have the creation level, but then on that new creation, the spiritual level, among all the different rites, there's actually this beautiful diversity that comes out of it through this unity. And that diversity would kind of just fall into, I don't know, some sort of anarchism if it wasn't for this unity that kind of held all these diverse groups, these local churches together. And they can really only exist and flourish through time as well if they have that singular source as well, which I think is beautiful. But that's a point that kind of popped into my head after the Nicole Delaney discussion as well.
I had a similar experience as yours, Zach. Not exactly, but related. That I didn't want to become a Catholic. I was kind of done with it, and really, really, my heart wanted to be Reformed Baptist or Orthodox. That doesn't make any sense. But those were my, I'm going to go one or the other.
No, I actually just a quick pause. I do think that actually makes sense. Like if I was not convinced about the validity of the sacraments and the teaching authority of the magisterium and apostolic succession. If I was not convinced by those three things, I probably would be some brand of Reformed Protestant, because I actually think it's a very coherent soteriology. I think it makes sense. There's a lot of scholarship, and they have a pretty rich tradition given how young that tradition is. And so, even though that tradition is young, they also lean on a lot of the fathers. Like they build a lot of their soteriology around Augustine, for example. Yeah. So I actually don't think that's as crazy as it might sound at first glance.
Great. Well, I feel better about it now. I mean, it was like a crisis, but I think what I in the grand scheme of like all the kind of all these different fracturing in the Protestant world, I just thought, if Christ is true, if Jesus is God, I can't possibly imagine that he would make it so hard for me to figure out the theology, and I can't become a theologian. So there just has to be a better method, and the church as guarantor of the truth, I think made the most logical sense to me. Otherwise, I was just kind of losing my mind trying to figure it out on my own, and that was for me the thing, like you were saying, there has to be like a authority and a guardianship of it, because I simply can't possibly be expected to figure it out on my own.
Mm-hmm. And nobody seems to be doing. I think that's right.
But I have a Persian friend who's a convert actually from Islam. That's the true use of the word conversion, because it was from a totally different other religion.
Yeah, that's right.
And his dad said to him, and this his nominally Muslim dad said, listen, if Christianity is true, then there really would only be one church, and look at all the other churches out there. And he's like, all right. And that was for him another sign of becoming a Catholic Christian.
Yeah.
So Zac, you are at Hallow, correct?
I am. Yep.
Yeah. I'm interested. Hallow has become huge these days. Within Hallow itself, the people working there is being Byzantine, or just being non-Latin. Is that unique, or does Hallow tend to actually have a pretty good diversity, I guess, or does it? Are you kind of singled out like, oh, Zac's our Byzantine guy?
Token Eastern Catholic.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. No, there's another Hallow chap who attends. He's not officially Byzantine, but he attends a Melkite liturgy regularly. So he and I are kind of the token Byzantines. But I would say, that's certainly not a fault of Hallow, because I would say that's roughly representative of the Catholic Church in America. It's, as you were saying before, James, many people don't even know about these traditions that exist in Catholicism. I mean, our pastor, Father Loya at Annunciation, he jokes about how people will be like, oh, you're the pastor of that. That's a church? I thought that was a mosque, because it has the very distinctive Byzantine architectural style on the outside, and it does not look like what you expect a Christian church to look like.
Where do you think they got the idea from, by the way?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So no, I think having two Byzantines on staff at Hallow is actually probably higher than we're probably overrepresented on the staff of Hallow compared to the rest of the U.S. Catholic population.
That's what my former priest boss told me when I taught high school. He's like, there are a lot of Eastern Catholics teaching at this high school. There's way too much Eastern overrepresentation. Spoken like a true Roman Catholic priest. But Zac, also, I have to give a shout out because I love your podcast, Zac. I love your podcast.
Thank you.
So everybody we'll link it to the show notes. But
what's the name of the podcast?
It's called Creedal. So I initially named it Creedal Catholic, and it was a dumb play on words, because it was like, I'm not a cradle Catholic, I'm a Creedal Catholic, because I embrace the creeds.
Yeah.
And then that was just kind of a mouthful, and every time I introduced an episode, I would trip over my words. So I just said Creedal, and so now it's just Creedal, and now no one really knows the context of that word. But it's called Creedal, Creedal.
Awesome.
And I'm glad that Simone enjoys it. My production tempo has gone way down as we've had more kids, and life at Hallow has gotten busy. So I try to release an episode, every month or so, but the production tempo has certainly slowed.
Well, you have a lot of good podcasts that everybody can catch up to. I mean, I really do genuinely love Creedal.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Simone, that's all I've got. Do you have any final questions for Zac?
I mean, we try to keep these episodes about 30 minutes, but Zac, is there anything like any final thoughts or comments on, because part of the mission of this podcast of Beyond Rome is not just to expose Roman Catholics to the Eastern churches, but also to help them breathe with both lungs. I was just talking to a Maronite girl who's based in Lebanon, who's trying to bring TOB, theology of the body, to, Arabic speaking women and men, and not just in Lebanon, but in the Near East. And we were just talking about how important it is for the West to be enriched by the East. And so, of course, she's being enriched by the West because of all of the resources and the money that we have, to be able to produce so much content, like your podcast, Ascension Press, like all the different things that we offer in the West.
Those are very different categories of existence, by the way.
I mean, there's
one is at a very different level than the other.
There's well, you're very humble, but these, whether it's big or small, right? There's just a lot of content that the West can create, but that needs to be also enriched by the East. So we were just talking about, so is there anything just kind of on your heart and mind because of your entering into an Eastern church that you think, yeah, I really would love Roman Catholics who are tapping into their Eastern roots to, think about this or be enriched by this? I realize the whole podcast is kind of about that, but
that's good. I mean, I didn't really talk at length, and I won't talk at length since we're about out of time, about my sort of reasons for officially transferring, but it may be worth touching on a few of those at least. One of them is, so my wife and I have 5 children now, and because we try to be good Catholics, we really believe in the power of the sacraments and the efficacy of God's grace through them. And the Byzantines, and I think the rest of the Eastern churches, but I'm not positive, Simone can correct me if I'm wrong, practice paedocommunion, meaning your children can receive communion from baptism and on up.
Yeah.
So the process, and this was done in the ancient church, but the process is baptism at infancy combined with chrismation, the mystery of chrismation, which is equivalent to the Latin confirmation, and then communion, the mystery of Holy Eucharist. And so we really wanted our kids to receive those graces and receive them early and often. So that was a major motivator for us. And I think it's so cool that the East has kept this tradition of paedocommunion alive.
Yeah.
I should mention this, the only thing stopping the Latin West from doing that is just canon law. So this is not a dogmatic or doctrinal issue. This is just a practice that's developed, and canon law is developed because of the practice. So we thought that was really cool. The second thing that I already touched on was just the experience of the Divine Liturgy. I think one thing that I really appreciate about the Divine Liturgy is that it is so experiential. It is very difficult to just be a fly on the wall in Divine Liturgy because you are literally singing for half of it.
Yeah.
And as you already pointed out, James, you're standing for a lot of it. So like when we bring guests, they'll often just, get, especially if they're non-Catholic, they'll just get tired and sit down because you're standing on your feet for a lot of it. There are so many metanies where you bow down and pretend to pick dust up off the ground and then, cross yourself. So there's just so much movement. There's so much active participation. We really like that experiential part of the faith because we're incarnational. So there's certainly those, there's some experiential things in a Latin Mass as well. This is not a total differentiator, but I think the experiential part comes through more strongly. There's the aesthetic part as well of the Divine Liturgy, especially if you're celebrating it in a church that is covered floor to ceiling in icons and iconography. There's so much symbolism that's going on throughout, and it's just really, really, really full of richness. There's also just the disciplines of the church. So now that I am a Byzantine Catholic, I'm not sure what your situation is as an Armenian, Simone, but the fasting periods are more strict than the Latins. At the same time, though, the emphasis is less on sort of rigidity of that and more about God wants to be near us. So we take on these extra penances as we can, when we can. But if we can't, God is merciful and just and loves us anyway. So I found that helpful for my personal piety to just be asked to do more. I have frequently, privately and publicly, been critical of the USCCB for just abrogating all of the requirements that we used to have. Like we can ask Christians to do more than what we do, but we frequently just say like, oh, it's pretty hard to give up meat on Friday. So let's just say they can do that if they want, or they can just, I don't know, like go to bed 30 minutes early, like take on an equivalent penance. And it's like, no, we should actually still be asked to do hard things.
Yeah.
And so I think all those things, there are additional reasons as well, but I'll stop there. I can actually also add, so I think the takeaway from that comment should just be, you should go to a Divine Liturgy. There are lots of Byzantine churches in the US. Most of them are very, very small. But if you're living in a decently populated center, there's a good likelihood there's a Byzantine church within a 45 to 60 minute drive for you. And I encourage you to go to one because I think you'll really be impressed and really enjoy it. You also might want to check out a couple of books. There's one that I found helpful, Introduction to Liturgical Symbolism, or liturgical services and their symbolism in the Eastern churches, by Patriarch Gregorios III, who I think has since passed away, but he was the Melkite Patriarch of Jerusalem, if I'm not mistaken. And this is a really cool just introduction to what the Byzantine liturgies look like.
Awesome.
And then if you're inclined to a more scholarly read, I've only leafed through this. I have not read it yet, but I attend Divine Liturgy celebrated by this man, Father Khaled Anatolios, who teaches at the University of Notre Dame. He's a wonderful man, and this is a book of his that's sort of exploring an Eastern Christian theology of salvation that is obviously consonant with the Catholic the Catholic tradition, because he's a Catholic priest. He's a convert from Islam as well, actually, Simone. But it really emphasizes the importance of the cross and theosis, this idea of us being fully united with God, which is a tapestry that is much more prominent in the Eastern tradition than it is in the Latin tradition. So that might be a good one if you're interested in more sort of diving into some of the richness of the Eastern tapestry, as it were.
We'll have to link those books. James, I wanted to say that actually I'm sorry, Zach, there is an exception to the Eastern churches, but you're right. Most of them, triple threat, all three sacraments at baptism. So, but I just wanted to make a little footnote.
What is the exception?
Currently, the Armenians in the US.
No.
I know.
Of course they would.
I don't think my bishop's listening to this podcast, but I have spoken to him about about that. But again, because things are different, not just in churches, but also in countries, that is something that is that could change. But
when I've spoken to Easterns about this, though, they do tend to get a little bit worked up about the sort of Latinization of things now, and I think a lot of those types of moves are because of some level of Latinization. I have a friend who's a Chaldean Catholic, and my understanding of the Chaldean rite is that it's basically bishop by bishop, and so he had to specially petition his bishop to allow for his infant children to receive all three sacraments, because the ordinary practice in that diocese, if that's the word they use, is to not do it until age 7, like the Latins.
Yeah, well, but my mother is Greek Orthodox, so I got it. Didn't even matter if I was Armenian, because for sure she told me she gave me communion anyway. So my first communion came from my mother, who was like breaking off the Eucharist and
scandalous.
Moms.
I mean, yeah, she's totally my mom. She is her own woman, but
I love mom's passion for their children's spiritual formation. It's a beautiful thing.
I'm not going to deprive you of communion. I don't even think she noticed whether I got it at my baptism / chrismation or not. But next time we were at church, which was next time, I got my first communion.
That's so funny.
But that, I think, is like actually the best reason and the perfect reason. And I do hope that the Latin rite changes in this way. I know we're reversing the order back to the ancient order, and we're lowering the age of confirmation, but why not just do it all? So
I agree. Yeah. Absolutely.
Got to assimilate people to it slowly, just down. Yeah.
It's the law of incrementalism.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks so much, Zach. It was awesome having you. We will we'll include everything you mentioned in the links for our listeners, including the Creedal Podcast. I have yet to dig into that, so I'm excited to start listening to that as well. But yeah, thanks again so much, and it was awesome having you on for conversation.
Well, thank you both of you. Thank you for your great work at the Fallows Project and Beyond Rome. It's great.
Sure thing.